Okay, go.
At 1 minute before 1 o'clock this morning, the switchboard at the Capitol received a phone call. A man's voice said a bomb would go off in the building in half an hour. At 1:30 in the morning, it did, in a small, unmarked restroom on the ground floor of the Senate side, next to a barber shop and near several small offices, including one committee hearing room.
There was alarm for a time that other bombs might still be hidden inside the Capitol. Police used dogs specially trained to sniff out explosives in a painstaking search both inside and outside the building. The single bomb set off by a timing device left the men's room a shambles, plumbing demolished, bricks and plaster ripped from walls.
Ooh.
And we're back.
Ew. Man.
How's it going?
It's all right. It's all right.
This is Colin. I'm remembering to announce myself.
Hey, and this is Scott, the man who botched that intro.
It was close. And cue the music.
Yeah, StreamYards. Got this.
We need the control, some kind of podcast control panel or something. I don't know.
Yes. Yeah, something here. But
I do have a new microphone. I hope everyone likes the sound of my voice tonight. I don't have to play it up. I'll still be natural, but
yeah, you good. I like it.
It's fun.
Yeah. As we say, we're in the game.
Got to get in the game.
Cool. So let's see. You're sharing your screen here.
Yeah, we're already on the topic. Controls. If you are watching,
and then maybe we'll just do that. Yeah.
All right. So that clip that I played was regarding the Weather Underground bombing the Capitol. And are you familiar with the Weather Underground?
Yeah, but let's act like I'm not. We'll talk about it a little bit. They have a nice logo. I always admire their dark logo, but yeah, I read a book about them a long time ago, probably before any documentary came out about them, which I haven't seen.
Oh, there's a good one which I'm going to feature some clips from.
Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah,
hope it doesn't trigger the censors at all, but you never know.
Yeah. But yeah, this book was read like kind of in the narrative of their like kind of edgy heroes. I found it like, like those old zine record stores, pre 9/11 era, before.
It's fun. It's funny you say that because the documentary that I'm going to feature here in a little bit does the same. It kind of paints them as like, and I remember when I watched it years ago, I didn't know much about the Weather Underground, and I watched it, and afterward, I was like, wow, they were kind of cool. Like, and I had no idea of any of the background, but I was into the 60s like any other kid that's fantasizing about the past. And so they had that aura attached to them, and taking down the government. This is not in the way that we need it, and we fight back. And it was like, oh, cool, I like the anti-war movement, but it
also gave it like a color to it that wasn't there before, because mostly it was like the anti-war movement. Then you have like the hippies, Woodstock, the music, the rioting, which I wasn't, the drugs, right? Which I wasn't really aware of the rioting until later. But yeah, they kind of like unveiled a little bit of mysticism about that time period to kind of like let me know that it actually like shit ran deep back then, or at least that's what it wanted me to think. And I was the same way, like, although I had an opposite reaction. I was like, what a bunch of douchebags. Like, because it was a book. So, like books as opposed to TikTok videos, it goes into detail, typically details that, it kind of follow their lives from when they started, all the way till kind of they broke up. So they were like a far left radical group. I also thought it was interesting that they came out of Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that here, very
Yeah.
close by
Yeah.
to you, and that is
No
that's interesting.
surprise. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. No
So
surprise.
the weather they were originally known as the Weathermen. I'm just going to read a little from Wikipedia, and they were organized as a faction of Students for a Democratic Society, who were a pretty far left political group in the 60s.
Yeah, which I think they came out of Port Huron. I'm
Oh,
not
I think you might be right. Yeah,
or something like that.
I can just
like,
pull that up.
they had
And
something to
founded
do.
at Ann Arbor, Michigan, also.
Oh, okay, yeah. They had something to do, but yeah.
So they were they they had some crazy. So they did they kind of became the violent wing of the SDS and broke off from them. And they did things like they bombed the Capitol, as I featured. They bombed the Pentagon, and they bombed the State Department.
Yeah.
Well, they didn't. I don't think they killed anyone with the bombs, because they'd always let people know, like, hey, we're gonna bomb a building, but don't be in the buildings. Supposedly is what their message was. But I thought that was pretty crazy.
Have you never heard about it ever? Probably. Like ever.
Yeah, very little. I mean, when Obama ran, they mentioned one of the people that started it a lot, Bill Ayers.
Yeah.
And
Oh.
he's a very interesting character, but
he was the hero of the book that I read. He was like the main guy.
Oh boy. Okay.
Basically, yeah.
Curious who wrote that book now.
Me too.
But they were, they did some crazy things, and I just want to start a clip off with it's from the documentary. The name of the documentary is the Weather Underground from 2002, and they have a clip. Well, they did the Days of Rage. I think it was 69, 68 in that range, where they kind of just did a pre-Antifa action kind of thing, where they just went through the streets, destroyed property, and was a riot protest. And watching this, I was getting, I don't know if you'll feel this way, but kind of getting flashbacks to the Summer of Love 2020.
So we thundered out of the park about 10 or 12 abreast, and we headed down this way. And the first building we came to was a bank, and we trashed every window in the bank. All glass, big plate glass windows, inviting, and that was like the signal. That was like Pavlov's bell.
Pavlov's bell. They broke the glass.
Oh.
And that's letting people know it's about to, shit's going down, right?
Yeah, but Pavlov's bell.
Right.
Somebody was already like, what, pre-programmed?
Yeah.
Seem to be violence for violence sake, with the radicals making no specific demands.
At about this point, at State and Division, we saw a serious barricade, several police cars.
I want to point out he's carrying a baseball bat just to reenact this event.
A real masked presence, and we had no out at that point, so we just swarmed into it, and there was a terrible fight right here.
Police generally acted with restraint, but 3 people were wounded by police gunshots.
Last night was the beginning for us. The ruling class in their Gold Coast decadence will walk their streets a little less secure tonight. If they hadn't dug it before, they'd better dig it now.
Who's the guy behind him smoking? He's got to be his handler. It's so
That's
odd.
about this guy right there.
Yeah.
It's very possible.
Before they'd better dig it now. They are the enemy.
The weatherman SDS has been trying to give the impression that the Black Panthers are on their side, but the Panthers deny this.
I love what the member of the Black Panthers has to say about the weatherman here. It's very funny.
We believe that the weatherman action is anarchistic, opportunistic, individualistic, it's chauvinistic, it's custoristic, and that's the bad part about it. It's custoristic in that its leaders take people into situations where the people can be massacred, and they call that revolution. And it's nothing but child's play, it's folly. We think these people may be sincere, but they're misguided, they're muddleheads, and they're scatterbrains.
Weathermen have totally distorted the concept of militancy. They see it as attacking the people. We're trying to ally with working people, and they're out attacking them. So it's a very simple thing. I mean, police couldn't do a better job. I tend to think that their purpose is just to make the name of SDS a dirty name, and they've managed to do a pretty good job of that.
Yeah, so they were just trying to start some conflict in the street because they saw it as a tactic.
Yeah, and there happen to be so many cameras there.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, like they called their friends down at the station, hey, things are going to get crazy. And
yeah.
So they had anticipated, I think, like thousands of people being there. I think it was just a couple hundred, but
yeah.
This is a tactic, and I want to quickly shift into a documentary from the 60s called Anarchy USA. You ever heard of this one?
Ooh, nope.
By G. Edward Griffin, the OG Federal Reserve.
Jekyll Island, man.
Jekyll Island, yeah.
Yeah.
And it explains kind of why. So why would you want to take it to the streets? Why would you want to
That's what
get
people
violent?
are.
Well, what's the purpose of it? What it's obviously you're trying to accomplish something, and it seems counterintuitive to like that last lady said there. You're alienating the working class, right? Well, this kind of explains it a little bit more.
The next step in the communist strategy is the most easily recognized, for it consists of the tactic of getting masses into motion, and thus precipitating mob violence. Master psychologists that they are, the communists know that once the masses are in the streets, it's not too difficult to convert an orderly demonstration into a full-scale riot. They know, too, that when rioting occurs, police and military forces of the government must move to restore law and order, and thus they have the first visible signs of revolution.
Riots, demonstrations, street battles, detachments of a revolutionary army. Such are the stages in the development of the popular uprising.
The official constitution and program of the Communist Party stated in 1921,
"The Communist Party will educate and organize the working masses for mass strikes and mass demonstrations. It is through struggles that the working masses are prepared for the final conflict for power. As these strikes grow in number and intensity, they acquire political character through unavoidable collision and open combat with the capitalistic state. Mass action culminates in insurrection and civil war."
In 1964, a communist document taken from the Viet Cong stated,
"Get the people out into the streets. Quarrels should be provoked. Youth groups are to be armed with knives and clubs, allegedly to protect themselves in a manufactured tension."
In China.
So they're trying to make that conflict, that class struggle or whatever, opposition that they're trying to make clear, choosing sides. They're trying to make it obvious and elicit more of a mob mentality from people who may be on their side ideologically, but aren't ready to do that. And I think we saw that a bit during 2020, where you just get mobs of people, and then you get those, the black masked Antifa people coming in, and
which they'll go anywhere.
Yeah, they're traveling circus almost.
But I also wondered, like, they picking now probably neighborhoods. Like, what kind of research are they doing to go in? Where do you start at? Which neighborhood? Which neighborhood's going to have a more likely probability of people joining in? Who's kettled in these neighborhoods? Whose steam is rising? I'm surprised Detroit didn't go wild.
Yeah, we had some in Denver.
Yeah, in Minneapolis, where that 2020 started, it was like, I mean, I don't know Minneapolis. I've been to Minneapolis. I've been to St. Paul. Seems like things are worse in St. Paul. But I always thought in Minneapolis would be like the least likely place. Like, it was so chill when I was there. I was there in 2017, 2018, I think. Yeah, it just shocked me that that's the place that would get going super crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of racial tension there. There's a lot of immigrants from
Somalia,
Yeah, Somalia, yep.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, redlining and other things that have been done there.
It's true.
So I think it was just one of those, like, what is it? Pots ready to burst, or I'm forgetting the analogy, but it boiled over, obviously, in 2020 with all that.
Yeah.
And I mean, when you have the microscope on your city like that during the pandemic, I mean, it just, I don't think it's that easy to replicate that level of response again, because it was kind of a pandemic thing too. But
yeah, same with the pandemic too. That's going to be hard to replicate.
Right. Yeah, they're going to have to do something different.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to play that because I think it kind of gives you a little more insight into how these tactics are used. And this is, I mean, these are old tactics. This is an old playbook that was brought out by this group in the U.S., maybe for the first time, or, one of the more obvious examples of it, I guess.
Yeah.
But I wanted to play another clip where I think it was a member of SDS, or I don't think he actually joined the Weathermen, but he's kind of critiquing where they were heading and where their ideology was taking them, which many other people have been down this road before, and it's not really it's not a good road to be down. Not good company, if you ask me.
They were not brought. They brought themselves to that point, to the point at which they were ready to be mass murderers. This is mass murder we're talking about. They came to this conclusion, which is the conclusion that was come to by all the great killers, whether Hitler or Stalin or Mao, that they have a grand project for the transformation and purification of the world. And in the face of that project, ordinary life is dispensable. They joined that tradition.
On March 6, 1970, as the Weatherman Group on West 11th Street put the final touches on the bomb, there was a short circuit in the wiring, and the device accidentally exploded.
An expensive townhouse in New York's Greenwich Village was destroyed by 3 explosions, which killed at least 3 people.
Did you notice that last little bit there that I found odd?
Visually or
no, the information about the event.
The 3 bombs that killed 3 people.
I actually didn't pick that one up. Now listen again and tell me if you notice anything strange from what they say about it. Let's go back. Here we go.
And the device accidentally exploded.
An expensive townhouse in New York's Greenwich Village was destroyed by 3 explosions.
Expensive townhouse.
Yeah. These guys are underground, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know they were hiding and a lot of like I remember this incident too. But they had a lot of rich friends that were like
right
part of the group, or they brought in probably to use. Because like a few of them ended up taking the fall for a lot of this stuff.
You know, now that you're saying that, let me just shift to the next clip because, yeah, for one, I mean they had a lot of connections. Bernadine Dorn worked for the National Lawyers Guild. She was married to Bill Ayers.
Yeah.
They were like, you know, the pretty much the face of it. But and I don't know where she went to school. I can look that up. But I know Bill Ayers went to the University of Michigan. They have a lot of lawyer friends. And we'll get to further down this rabbit hole in a little bit. But they have a lot of institutional help. And monetary help. And so you said people took the fall for some of the things that they did, right?
Yeah.
Well, let me just fast forward here, and I'll let them.
She went to the University of Chicago.
You know, okay, there you go.
Yeah,
there you go.
I would.
Oh wait, wrong one. Hold on. 1 second.
Oh, she was a cheerleader too. Treasurer for the Modern Dance School.
By the end of the 70s, almost all of the members of the Weather Underground had turned themselves in. Few ended up going to prison. Ironically, the government was forced to drop most of the charges against them when it became clear how much the FBI had broken the law in pursuing the group.
Yeah, so the FBI got somehow the one of the more radical political groups that bombed very important buildings, you know, places that had been stormed in other instances. Somehow the FBI just they were doing illegal things and they just couldn't bust them. Kind of an open shut case, but you know, maybe they were doing some shady shit with COINTELPRO and the FBI, and maybe the courts were more you know, in favor of overturning that case, but clearly to get off of all of those events is pretty impressive, if you ask me.
Oh yeah, I mean, you're talking treason.
Yeah, I mean, if you're, you know, I don't like the word terrorism because I think it's kind of undermines our constitutional rights, but absolutely.
I mean, that's that's the definition of what they're doing.
Yeah, if you're going to use that definition, they're doing organized criminal political acts and intentionally to overthrow the government. That was their intent.
Yeah.
And they interview a lot of the members, and this one lady, it just stuck with me how she felt about her time, and it's emblematic of Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn and almost everyone else that's interviewed from the Weather Underground about how they feel about what they did, because they don't really they don't let's just say they don't have a lot of regrets.
I would do it again. I'd like to do it better, differently, smarter, but in a revolutionary context, if I didn't have my old parents and my young kid, I would certainly do it again. I would certainly want to be part of an emerging revolution again. It was a precious, precious opportunity.
Precious.
And I think we came close. I mean, I think the world came close to seeing those major changes. And I think that
Notice how she goes from
makes a difference.
She's like, I think we, and then she turned it from the individual into the collective of the world came close. Did you catch that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I find that interesting considering their political backgrounds of collectivism.
Yeah, where they're tapped into that, worldwide revolution.
Yeah, they want you to believe it's for the good of the collective, for everybody.
Oh, for sure.
But it's really for them.
It's a, what did she say? It's a precious, precious thing, right?
Yeah.
It's precious.
For
her. No regrets, and,
in terms of the ability of movements for change to emerge in the future. The fact that there's a history of resistance, there's a history of white people's participation in resistance, I think makes a difference to the ability of that kind of resistance to emerge again.
You think it will?
I think it already is.
Ooh.
All right.
So cliche.
It already is.
This poor guy, I think. Didn't he get tagged for it?
No. Everyone in this documentary didn't face prison time, which very very convenient for them. But I wanted to play, since she said she'd do it again. I just want to ask, would she do this again?
I brought up the subject of what's going to happen after we take over the government. We become responsible then for administrating, 250 million people. And there was no answers. No one had given any thought to economics. How are you going to clothe and feed these people? The only thing that I could get was that they expected that the Cubans and the North Vietnamese and the Chinese and the Russians would all want to occupy different portions of the United States. They also believed that their immediate responsibility would be to protect against what they called the counter-revolution. And they felt that this counter-revolution could best be guarded against by creating and establishing re-education centers in the Southwest, where we would take all the people who needed to be re-educated into the new way of thinking and teach them how things were going to be. I ask, well, what is going to happen to those people that we can't re-educate, that are die-hard capitalists? And the reply was that they'd have to be eliminated. And when I pursued this further, they estimated that they would have to eliminate 25 million people in these re-education centers. And when I say eliminate, I mean kill. 25 million people. I want you to imagine sitting in a room with 25 people, most of which have graduate degrees from Columbia and other well-known educational centers, and hear them figuring out the logistics for the elimination of 25 million people. And
it was a precious, precious time.
Wow.
I'd do it again.
Yeah, if it weren't for my kid, my mama.
I think it is coming. She seems kind of semi-delusional about what she did, and kind of in a cult, if you ask me. But
yeah.
A little cultish.
Yeah, they were all screwing.
Oh, yeah.
Drugs.
Oh, yeah.
They messed up their minds pretty bad. Yeah. Well, now you got me on this list. There's so many people in here. There's like a good, I don't know, 20, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, maybe 60 people in this group.
Oh, in the Weather Underground, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't that big.
Yeah. That still seems like a lot.
But, to be underground and doing that, yeah, they,
How they didn't get caught or why the FBI had to do illegal things to catch them is beyond me.
Right. I mean, and the way they talk about it, it's like they're admitting that they did it. But I guess, because of those technicalities, they can't prosecute. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But the way Bill Ayers speaks about his time, I mean, he's said some crazy statements since then. Just before what was it? No, it's not. He had a memoir in 2001, and basically, let's see here. He pretty much was saying that the attacks were justified, and he said that he doesn't regret setting the bombs. I feel we didn't do enough.
3 people
When
died.
asked if he would do it all again, he said, "I don't want to discount the possibility." This is in 2001.
That's very tricky language.
Yeah, he knows how to.
That's some Fauci
weasel.
language.
He knows how to weasel out of things, and he does that a lot. And then he's like, "Oh, the context was distorted." You know, I was talking about stopping U.S. efforts in Vietnam, but he's implying that, and with how hard they come down on a lot of the January 6th people in relation to any connection they had to that event, and then you see this guy just strolling around, and where did Bill Ayers end up after he got off on this crime spree? He just was at the University of Illinois, as a professor for a few decades.
Yeah. What was he teaching?
I believe, I think it was like education or politics. Let me see here. Well, he was very involved in the education system. He he taught at the College of Education. Interests included teaching for social justice, urban educational reform, narrative and interpretive research, children in trouble with the law, related issues. So he also earned his master's in education from Bank Street College. Not familiar with that. And also a master's in ed at the same time later. At Columbia in Chicago. And where did Bernadine Dorn, his wife, end up? Who reminder, guys, they're communists. They're revolutionaries. They're counterculture. So where does Bernadine Dorn end up after they get off on this crime spree?
I want to say somewhere in the government.
Well, it'd be the Sidley and Austin law firm, which, if you look it up, they're one of the biggest multinational law firms in the world, which seems kind of, against fighting the capitalist regime, because this fucking outfit got caught up in the savings and loan crisis in the 80s.
Wow.
Are you familiar with that?
Not intricately.
Yeah, it was basically a scam that was committed on another Wall Street scam. I don't know the specifics of it, but let's just say they got caught up in it. And you have a ex or current communist revolutionary as a lawyer. Why? I don't know. Maybe Bernadine Dorn isn't fighting the man.
Yeah.
But it's very, very strange that's your path, right?
Well, it looks like she got picked up probably a decade after, when optics were good. In 1984, she was hired by Howard Trianens, French, probably French, head of the law firm who knew Thomas Ayers, her father-in-law. So who are these people? Like, who are their parents?
Well, that brings up my next point is, who is Thomas Ayers? Bill Ayers' dad. Let's see. Well, this guy had to be one of the most connected people in Chicago at the time, because let's just read his credentials here. Ayers served as chairman of the board of trustees of Northwestern University, the Erickson Institute, the Bank Street College of Education. Oh, that's where Bill went afterward. Okay. The Chicago Symphony Orchestra, the Chicago Community Trust, the Chicago Urban League, the Community Renewal Society, the Chicago Association of Commerce and Industry, Chicago United, the Leadership Council for Metropolitan Open Communities, and Dearborn Park Corp., and served as vice president of the Chicago Board of Education. Ayers, it goes on. Ayers also served on the board of directors of Sears, G.D. Searle, Chicago Pacific Corp, Zenith Corp, Northwest Industries, General Dynamics Corporation, First National Bank of Chicago, the Chicago Cubs, and the Tribune Company. I mean, how did he have time for all of these organizations for one? But holy shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, that guy, you could not find a guy who's more connected.
And a guy who has a smaller Wikipedia.
yeah, there's not much.
No, there's really not.
There's not much. But he so he clearly also helped Bernadine Dorn, who I have to point out that the Sidley Austin, can you guess who else happened to, go there?
Oh, Michelle Obama?
Well, yeah, it would be both of them.
Really?
They were both there.
No.
That's where they met?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Oh, yeah. Let's find this clip. I have it.
Big Meech. In Austin?
Sidley Austin. I think
Austin.
I think they have offices in Chicago. Yeah, he was a summer associate here. Let's take it to Barack.
I was a summer associate in Chicago at Sidley and Austin, and I met my wife there. So I don't know whether you guys got anything going.
Why are they laughing?
I just want you to know. We've now been married 15 years. Neither of us are still at the firm, but so there are other aspects to this whole summer associate thing. The second
aspect?
I just point out is, going to Yankees games and eating at fancy restaurants and all that stuff. That won't happen once you're an associate.
All right. Yeah, the yucking it up at his old law firm, where Bill Ayers' wife happened to get a cush job after being a domestic terrorist, and where he met Michelle.
Sheesh. Go figure.
And so Barack Obama also started his political career in, I think, with Bill Ayers present, if not at his house, if I'm not mistaken. So this guy, I mean, the Ayers family, very, very connected into the Chicago political scene.
Yeah.
Bill Ayers, I mean, based on his father, it wouldn't surprise me if Thomas either put Bill up to it or just enabled his son to do this type of activism. But he was Thomas Ayers was like the more legitimate face of the same type of activism, but more covertly and, above ground, whereas his son was under the ground.
Yeah, so his dad Thomas would have been about 25, 24, that that age, around the time of World War II. Whether he served or not, who knows.
Mm-hmm.
But in those impressionable ages of, like, let's say, I don't know, 15 to 25, let's just say, then he was around that time where the communism was the communism and the mysticism, the new intellectual thought, the new thought clubs were happening in the late 20s and 30s.
You
know what I mean? Those esoteric manifesting societies,
like the Theosophy Society.
Sure, yeah. And many of them. There's so many of them. So much was going on back in that era. But who's Thomas Ayers' father is what I really want to know.
Yeah, that is a good question.
He was a CEO of Commonwealth Edison.
Yeah,
little boy out of Detroit.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. Seems like there's more to that story.
I just want to point out also, he has another son, John Ayers, who was on the staff of a former U.S. representative and a national leader in charter school development. So this whole family is very invested in education.
Yeah, and politician making, it seems.
The king making, essentially. Like,
yeah.
It strikes me, I wouldn't be surprised if Thomas Ayers is involved in those organizations, those occult secret society type organizations, as well as he seems very probably intelligence connected. I mean, Sidley Austin strikes me as some type of, CIA connected outfit or something along those lines. Chicago in general is just spook central. It's really no joke.
Yeah.
So another organization, I mentioned that Bernadine Dorn was in the National Lawyers Guild. And this organization is also very interesting. They were founded in 1937 as an alternative to the American Bar Association. Very progressive minded, but more so just straight up, communist. They have a lot of different connections to a lot of this stuff. And they also were very instrumental during 2020 in helping to bail out protesters. And I wanted to play this clip that kind of illustrates that this organization is a linkage between groups like the Weather Underground and Antifa today.
The death of George Floyd at the hands of police sparked protests and riots around the country. But the early spontaneous protests were followed by 19 months of unrest, with some of the worst rioting perpetrated by self-described anti-fascists, or Antifa, in the Pacific Northwest. How did these often violent extremists take over whole city blocks, as they did in Seattle, or engage in 200 days of nightly rioting, as they did in Portland, without local police or officials stopping them? One part of the answer is they had lawyers funded by deep pockets on the left. The National Lawyers Guild, a nonprofit group of left-wing attorneys and other legal professionals, were key in helping coordinate legal support for more than 20,000 arrested protesters. In his book, Unmasked: Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy, journalist Andy Ngo went so far as to call the Guild, in effect, the legal arm of Antifa. While Americans watched their cities burn night after night on the evening news, the Guild arranged legal representation for protesters and sent letters to the Biden administration urging them to drop charges against rioters, even criminals who had firebombed buildings or menaced innocent citizens. While the mainstream media mostly hid the Guild's role in these protests, the group's aid to extremists goes way back. Its efforts to foster and protect radicalism through legal work began in the late 1930s. By 1940, the group was so dominated by Communist Party members that its left-of-center non-communist members were abandoning it en masse, as 3/4 of the membership resigned. Later in the 1960s, some Guild members were involved with extremist groups like the Weather Underground, which was dedicated to the violent overthrow of the U.S. government. The Weather Underground's tactics included intimidation, bomb-making, and calls for assassinations of police and military members. Bernadine Dorn, the famous wife of Barack Obama's friend Bill Ayers, became the National Lawyers Guild's student organizer in 1967 and spoke at the Guild's 1970 convention while simultaneously serving as top Weather Underground leader. In his book, Days of Rage: America's Radical Underground, the FBI, and the Forgotten Age of Revolutionary Violence, journalist Brian Burrow writes that a relatively small group of radical lawyers, almost all of whom belonged to the National Lawyers Guild, were by far the most important single source of money for the Weathermen. The Guild's work of sowing discord, promoting violent radicalism, and defending the purveyors of both continues today as the Guild protects extremists like Antifa. In fact, the Guild has publicly supported Antifa's actions, declaring that it will continue to support anti-fascists and anti-racists in the streets and in the courts, and will not be swayed by the argument that hateful, dangerous speech should be tolerated at any cost. Ominously, the Guild is growing. According to its 2020 annual report, membership remained relatively flat at fewer than 2,500 from 2005 to 2015. But after 2015, it began to grow dramatically, with 5,000 new members joining its ranks in 2020 alone. That roughly coincides with Antifa's own growth. As radicals spouted woke orthodoxy while they burned down American cities during the summer of 2020, they were protected and sheltered by highly educated and politically aligned attorneys at the National Lawyers Guild. Meanwhile, Americans who assumed the riots were about the death of George Floyd didn't realize the attempted overthrow of the rule of law that they were watching had been planned nearly a century in advance.
Right.
These guys are connected.
Yeah.
They've been around almost like 90 years.
Yeah, that's that era. That's that era that I'm talking about. That like weird. I mean, a lot of things coalesced at the same time, like off topic, like Federal Reserve, 1913 era, World War One. What else came that way? Income tax came that way. I mean, that's just some surface government shit, but at the same time, there was something brewing.
Sure.
Underneath, like, what didn't the Socialist Party get a shit ton of votes at some point?
You're saying Eugene Debs or
yeah, the turn of the century, like whatever started happening, preamble to like the Bolshevik Revolution is some really crazy shit. A lot of interconnectedness. I think that still goes on today, but
well, the Communist Manifesto was written like what 1870 or.
So you had like 30 years for that to kind of brew.
Right. You had a whole
into a generation. Yeah.
Yep. And then that just has continued to kind of grow in the background.
Yeah. Amongst rich people, though, people with money.
Yeah. Which is, you would think that's counterintuitive.
Yeah.
That why would they care? And then also, why would avowed communists go work for Sidley and Austin?
Well, I think because the communists or people that understand and promote communists know that there's a ruling class on top. And I think potentially that since we haven't achieved it yet, that ruling class on top is still yet to be determined, no?
Well, there's certainly, I think, in the great dialectic that plays out on many stages, it's basically they're using the communists are one part of the dialectic because you have two generally opposite ends opposing one another.
Sure.
And that conflict creates history, and knowing that history is mostly driven by conflict between two forces. If you had studied history and you understood that, being the elite class, you would probably want to create both sides. And I think that's where, I don't know if you know Anthony Sutton at all.
No.
I want to jump ahead here a little bit because it's relevant to this whole conversation because it's about the Hegelian dialectic.
Okay.
And we'll get into this later. The method they use is that of the Hegelian dialectic.
This is Anthony Sutton.
Played against antithesis leads to a synthesis. In other words, for Hegel, for history to make progress, you have to have conflict. And when you look at the key people in the order, you will find that they generate conflict. So Bush and Harriman politically are conflicting. Coffin and Buckley, although part of the same order, are in public conflicting with one another because conflict leads to the new synthesis.
The order want to accomplish in the Bolshevik Revolution?
You create opposing forces which you place in conflict. Out of conflict, you've got profit, you've got political power, and you can direct history. And if you look at the writings, for example, of the Trilateral Commission, they talk openly in the Trilateral Commission about managing conflict, not solving conflicts, but managing conflicts. Conflict management. That's the cry.
So they got the profit, the power, and the management. Mm-hmm. Where do they want to steer history through the Bolshevik Revolution?
They wanted to set up, and they did, two opposing forces. Out of that came World War II.
Yeah. Yeah, World War II does not fascinate me as much as World War One.
I need to do more research into World War One for that
Isn't
reason, I think.
isn't it crazy how like that was the first one and we always study and are bombarded with
It's
like
very true, yeah.
and by World War II, I mean you're just like mincing over details of what happened, you know?
I think I feel like maybe this is like maybe there is something to avoiding World War One, but from a Hollywood perspective, I feel like World War II is just it's got all the elements in
Yeah.
play, you know, and they
Yeah.
got better weapons and
Just like Rocky
interesting.
2 or Rocky 4, you know? Yeah.
There's only so many movies that can be made out of trench warfare, and so
Yeah.
it could be but I agree
True.
there is more to that story that hasn't been told.
Yeah.
Much like World War II as well, to the
Yeah.
general masses anyway. But
Yeah.
if you know that you're consolidating your wealth, you're doing all this shady shit behind the scenes, starting wars, you're the elites, right? You know that at
If
some
you're in
point,
if you're in the business of managing conflict, then yeah, you're an elite.
yeah.
For sure.
But if you're aware of the fact that what you're doing is eventually going to lead to some type of reaction from the masses, you'd be at a disadvantage to just let it happen organically. You don't want a trucker convoy coming at you.
Right.
You know? So instead you send in an element that is in a strong opposition to one particular thing, whether it's class or, recently like race or whatever the issue is, and you harness that energy and fuel it to a limited hangout kind of means that's just creating that synthesis and also accomplishing some other goals in the background, reduction of rights or whatever it is through that conflict. That we saw that with the war on terror, that
Yeah,
opposing side.
that stuff's all house money. You know, it's like let it ride. That's whatever comes out of that comes out of that. Yeah.
Mhm. And it's very easy to profit from it from that perspective. But if you have an arc of history that you're trying to achieve, whatever it is, you would want to write the script. In order to write the script, you got to write the guy that's opposing you, the man of the people, and that's kind of how I view communism, and actually it's communism and capitalism, I should say. And this next clip from Anthony Sutton really illustrates that.
But one of the first things you learn in this business is forget about capitalism versus communism. That is absolute nonsense. The two are, behind the scenes, are hand in hand.
It's a capitalist communist conspiracy. One conspiracy.
Yes, but you need the so-called conflict between the two to keep people focusing. Look, keep you looking over there. Capitalism versus communism. That makes a nice little picture. You get books on it and films on it. Capitalism versus communism. That's not where the action is. The action is over here.
Oh, which is where?
The Hegelists or the cultists.
Yeah.
You're saying. But I mean, there's an occult element to communism as well, where the people on the bottom don't really know what the ultimate goals are, and the people on the top might not even know that they're actually the person on the top.
Right. Yeah.
But I mean, if you know that, and there's a lot of evidence, the Rothschilds and Wall Street funded the Bolshevik Revolution. Anthony Sutton gets into that, and also funded Hitler.
Yeah.
You had Bush's
grandfather. Not in the whole, but they all were within a group that did. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I just want to make that clear distinction that there's not just one person or family funding all this. It's
the Rothschilds and Rockefellers are like at the front, but there's many other people involved outside of that. But it's interesting. I was trying to reflect on the level of institutional cover that Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn got after doing what they did is almost unprecedented in terms of the other way around, where right-wing people who committed crimes had the institutional cover and they got off, with the exception of the Bush family, in terms of funding Hitler and all of that. That was kind of like they were the fascist funders, and then you got the communist funders and the enablers. But as we've realized, the Bushes aren't really on the right, or whatever you want to frame it. They're globalists. They see the grand game. They're Hegelists,
Yeah.
So that's just, capitalist, communist is just a word. And if it achieves the same outcome, which if you look at China versus the United States, we're getting to the same end goal through different means.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's the track we're on. I hope we don't go that way, but it's the same playbook. So it doesn't matter what the system is if you just are constantly playing off each other. No matter which side wins, the elites still win.
Right.
In that, under that setup. So it makes sense. Although it still blows my mind that they didn't I should say, none of them went to jail for doing anything they did. But do you know who did go to jail?
Yeah, some dude that like 18 years later or something, they found him, didn't he? Wasn't that
no. So the prominent members that went to jail were Kathy Boudin and David Gilbert. And they were arrested because they were involved in an armed robbery that killed 2 police officers.
Right,
and it was it wasn't just like, the narrative they try to say is that, oh, it just we were just the drivers, we didn't know it was going to happen. But the story is much more blatant, that they got out of the car, they surrendered, and then I think they were with the Black Liberation Army, and they came out and shot and killed police officers. So they were a part of the setup. It wasn't just like accomplices. But
that was Kathy Boudin. Yeah.
Kathy Boudin, and David Gilbert, and they were arrested, and they served. I think they both were in jail for 20 or 30 years. Boudin got on parole in 2003, but David Gilbert had his sentence commuted by Andrew Cuomo right before he resigned. Would you just doing favors on the way out to just this lowly domestic terrorist that was charged with murder?
Wow!
But wouldn't you know it? Does the Boudin name ring any bells?
Like
to you?
Like Boudini?
Boudini?
No. No. Boudin? No.
So, well, let me just start from the top. Louis Boudin was Kathy Boudin's father, and he was very influential in helping the National Lawyers Guild.
Okay, is this a reference to the guy that died that was the cook? The chef?
No.
Anthony, that's Bourdain. Never mind.
Oh, Bourdain. Yeah.
I was like, I thought you were going to go
wish.
down this rabbit hole.
No.
Oh, okay.
So Kathy's father was influential in the National Lawyers Guild, which is the legal arm for the Weather Underground, and then becomes the, for Antifa. And, Kathy went to prison, but who's Kathy's son? Well, that's Chesa Boudin, who, up until just last year, was the district attorney for San Francisco.
Yeah, okay. He's like
like it runs in the family, right?
Wow.
So Chesa Boudin, and as we have seen in cities around the country in the last few years, there's been this phenomenon of district attorneys not trying to prosecute certain crimes and instituting crimes of need where you can steal under $1,000 and not face any penalty, and getting rid of cash bail to just let people out right after they commit a crime. And what do you know? They do it again. He is part of that whole movement
Yeah.
Which, was kind of started by our friend Soros. And I wanted to play this clip of just about
How he
what's
got
going on.
elected. Yeah.
What's up with
The rogue
this?
prosecutor movement stems from the basic idea that the entire criminal justice system is racist, and as pro-criminal anti-victim zealots bought and paid for by George Soros and tech billionaires, they adopt pro-criminal policies. They choose large categories of crimes not to prosecute. In Fairfax County, which is near Washington, D.C., Steve Descano is the rogue prosecutor elected in large part because of George Soros' money. George Soros contributed 75%, more or less, of the total amount of money Steve Descano got to his campaign. Without Soros' money, Steve Descano and these other rogue prosecutors simply would not have been elected. The prosecutor in the American criminal justice system occupies a unique role. Her job is to enforce the criminal law of the state legislature as passed and signed by the governor, or the federal law passed by Congress and signed by the president. Their job is to do justice. It's not to get convictions. We have an adversarial system in our country. You have strong, ethical prosecutors representing the people, and you have strong, zealous criminal defense attorneys representing those charged with crimes. Rogue prosecutors upend that. They erase the wall between prosecution and defense by taking a pro-defense, anti-victim stance, refuse to enforce large swaths of crimes across the book under the guise of prosecutorial discretion. It has nothing to do with prosecutorial discretion. And as a result, crime explodes in the cities where they've been elected. For example, in Boston, Rachel Rollins, the rogue prosecutor of Suffolk County, lists on her website 15 crimes you can commit in Boston. That includes possession with intent to distribute any drug, resisting arrest of a police officer, breaking and entering a house. The irony is that
breaking and entering a house. And you put that on, just put that online. I just want to point that out.
At the people who are getting murdered and raped and robbed the most are black and brown, poor people in the inner city. The very policies they promote are the policies that are causing death and destruction and rapes in the very cities they pretend to care about.
Wow.
So our boy Chesa Boudin.
He's got quite a family.
Yeah.
History on his mom's side.
Louis Boudin, man. So who is Louis Boudin? Well, he was a Russian-born Marxist theoretician. And, he immigrated from Russia.
Was this his grandfather?
His grandfather settled in New York City.
Hey.
And he was very involved in left-wing causes. But, yeah, he was a big funder of the National Lawyers Guild. And I would like to find out more about his family. I just, I was so deep down this rabbit hole, I didn't have time. But you can just continue to pull threads because clearly there's something going on with the Ayers family and the Boudin family. And I'm sure the Dorn family, actually, it's something, they changed their name.
Yeah, from Dorenstein.
Something along those lines. So, this guy is just, his legacy lives on. And thankfully, Chesa got booted out of office last year because, he got voted out. I mean, even in San Francisco, it went too far.
Wow.
But people have argued that Chesa Boudin was pretty much on a legal level continuing the vision of the Weather Underground and getting rid of mass incarceration, like not, very soft on crime, shall we say.
Yeah, and he's a Rhodes Scholar.
Oh, yeah. Isn't that interesting? So, yeah, I noticed that. Again, nothing says threat to the establishment quite like being a Rhodes Scholar.
Right. Or he also served as a translator in the Venezuelan presidential palace
Oh,
framed
yeah.
the admin of Hugo Chavez. What?
Yeah,
Before
dude.
law school. Hey, I'm just chilling. And it looks like he also got on his Rhodes Scholarship, talking about these graduate degrees here. One in forced migration, and the other in public policy in Latin America, which is, well known for those Marxist students to really glom on to the plight and history of Latin America plus Cuba.
Yeah, right.
But forced migration, I didn't even know that was a degree, which is an involuntary or coerced movement of a person or people away from their homes or home region.
So it's refugee study of refugees,
Like
essentially.
forced, coerced refugees.
Oh, yeah.
So coercing a group of people to leave one place to go to another. And I imagine the study is in how do you determine where they go or where they come from? Why? Yeah.
I wonder if Chessa has won any Kalergi awards or
What's Kalergi?
Well, that's the whole Kalergi plan that's been floated
Oh,
around.
in Europe?
But they actually give awards. Like, I think the German prime minister was her name? Angela Merkel got one.
Oh, nice. What'd she do? Just build a whole community for
I mean, just being very
Moroccans?
accepting of all of the refugees from our Middle East wars,
Right.
Just, you took one for the team, and
there's a non-sarcastic award for it. Like there's an actual
I think
presentable
No Agenda
award.
was. I'm pretty sure No Agenda played some clips
a
while back from the, which is it's right in your face, and then if you bring up like the Kalergi plan to, I think I'm just going to paraphrase the theory, but it's just to make countries less homogenous and more diverse, just around the world.
Turn everybody into
melting pots, right?
Drones, basically.
Yeah. Because sometimes that's easier to control. Hey, you have more sides to play off of one another. I mean, the Hegelists love that shit. I mean, it's believable.
I mean, we don't want individuals with pride about their upbringing or where they come from or where their families come from. Yeah, totally.
So, funny enough, Chessa, because his mom and dad went to prison for so long. Do you know who raised him?
I'm gonna guess Ayers.
You are correct. Yes, yeah. Bill Ayers. And
I was gonna say Big Meech, but maybe that was a little before
Chessa
his
was
time.
Yeah, it was a very fatherly influence there.
Okay, so did they ever have any kids of their own?
The
Ayers.
Yes. Well, funny you say that, because that leads perfectly into my next clip from Zane Dorn, who was
God, Chessa and Zane.
Yeah, what is Zane? Yeah, right. God.
Yeah.
Just granola eating fucking parents, right? Granola eating bombing parents,
Yeah.
They love those oats and chemicals. So he came out with a show, actually known as a podcast, and I didn't have time to listen to it. Would like to listen.
Yeah.
So Zane Dorn, this is an interview he gave, I think, with like another podcast, and he's just talking about his experience with having his parents, and I'm sure it's very non-biased, which I can kind of tell from this interview. But he is asked about the Weather Underground and if they were terrorists, and then he's also asked about another group involved in current events.
I don't think they were terrorists, and I think ultimately, the people who were dying in the 1960s and 1970s were, Vietnamese people overseas and Black people here at home. So the terror that was being felt was really among these kind of marginalized, oppressed populations. And the terrorist at the time, the biggest terrorist, was the United States government. So it's tricky. I don't mean to justify the kind of violent actions that the Weather Underground were carrying out, but I think the word terrorist is misapplied to them.
Right now, the country is watching the proceedings of the January 6th committee as they look at another group of insurrectionists, of people who tried to overthrow the U.S. government. Do you think it's fair to compare the Weather Underground with the January 6th insurrectionists?
No.
I think it's fair to raise the question, but I would argue that the comparison falls apart pretty quickly. I mean, to me, it is first of all important, and we can get into the tactics and the question of, is it ever justifiable to use violence to try to overthrow a government? But I actually do think the ends matter. Not that they justify the means, but that they matter. So it matters to me what you're fighting for. So if you compare the Weathermen to the January 6th insurrectionists, the Weathermen were actually fighting systemic racism and a genocidal war. The January 6th insurrectionists are white nationalists fighting for an authoritarian president who was literally sitting in the White House at that moment. So they were not a grassroots movement resisting oppressive government. They were literally a sort of a fascist push that was trying to keep this authoritarian president in office in, contravening a democratic election. So I think it matters that one group was fighting for racism, one group was fighting against racism, and so on.
Oh, what a great framing you just did there.
Fighting for racism.
Fighting for that's totally what Stop the Steal was about.
Yeah.
It I love that logic. It matters what you're fighting for. Yeah, that is the I don't know what fallacy that is, but it's clearly not.
It's the general fallacy. It's the yeah, that's true fallacy. Because obviously that's true. It does matter what you're fighting for.
In terms of what you're doing in relation to that?
No, just in terms of fighting.
Yeah, so that on its surface is true, but the actions, I'm not saying the ends justify the means, but they do. Essentially, was what he said.
Yeah, and I'm just saying that's how that comes across to the average listener. Like, yeah, it does matter what you're fighting for.
Right. It's a good line of argument.
Well, yeah, it gives him credibility. Not to us, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he was horrified by that, but a few bombs going off in the Capitol, which didn't happen, even though there were reports of bombs nearby, whatever. Which I don't think we ever found that person.
Yeah, with all those hours of footage, we never saw who put the bomb there.
Nope.
No.
So you don't. I want to bring. I thought this was a funny example to bring in terms of the treatment between this group coming from the left and January 6th coming from the right, and how they can be mythologized through all these different documentaries, the book you read, this podcast series, hold, institutional jobs in very influential positions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And get media cover, get them to not really cover or, focus on what they've done. Meanwhile, the unannounced tour through the Capitol is treated with, it's literally the worst thing since the Civil War, not even 9/11.
Yeah, those people had white privilege yet. Weather Underground did not.
Yeah.
Okay. Weathermen and women.
Sure.
Weather people.
Yeah, they did change from the Weathermen to the Weather Underground because of the gender. So they were ahead of their time for that.
Oh yeah.
But
it's always been the time.
What this example of how a group like the Weather Underground is treated in pop culture, in mainstream news. God, I can't. There were so many clips from Amy Goodman, like fawning over the Weather Underground. She interviewed, I think she interviewed Chessa when his dad got out of prison, and it was just like, oh, I'm so happy. Like,
wow,
just it's nauseating. But they have that. But where are the podcasts of Father Country Stormers or what? Where's the National Lawyers Guild for these people? Because some of them are still in prison. I don't know if they're still in solitary, but they're really having the book thrown at them in this way. But these guys don't. And this is something. Are you familiar? Well, we were talking earlier about James Lindsay, but are you familiar with Herbert Marcuse and repressive tolerance? Have we talked about this topic before?
Repressive tolerance, not specifically.
So that the treatment of January 6th versus the Weather Underground, I think, is a perfect example of repressive tolerance, and we are seeing it all across, on every level in terms of what is allowed on one side, where you have the 2020 riots, continuous issues, whatever, and then you have just the one January 6th incident, and it's literally treated as the worst thing ever. Meanwhile, everyone's getting bailed out, and it's mostly peaceful. It's mostly, you don't get that mostly with January 6th, even though you could certainly make that argument. But and this is essentially repressive tolerance, and it goes back to Herbert Marcuse's work, who was Angela Davis's mentor, and I'm sure Bill Ayers knew Herbert Marcuse.
Oh, personally, for sure. Now that I know who his dad is, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And they're running in the same circles, but this concept is very relevant to today.
Itself. He proposes as an alternative in this essay liberating tolerance, because we live in a repressive society, he says, that we need to be liberated from, which means we need to become communist or socialist. He defines it this way. This is the thesis statement of the essay. He writes, liberating tolerance then would mean intolerance against movements from the right and toleration of movements from the left. As to the scope of this tolerance and intolerance, it would extend to the stage of action as well as of discussion and propaganda, of deed as well as of word. And so he's quite explicit about this. Slightly before this in the essay, he discusses the concept of violence, and he explains how revolutionary or left-wing violence should be tolerated and is good, whereas reactionary violence, including self-defense, is always bad. And so there's your explanation for how Kyle Rittenhouse was treated during the riots of 2020. The neo-Marxist riots of 2020, as a matter of fact, coming out of BLM, which is a racial Marxist front organization that is based off of Herbert Marcuse's exact ideas. If you wonder why certain things are suppressed on social media and through the mass media and other things are promoted, whether it's Hunter Biden's laptop story, whether it's conservatives getting struck off of social media for saying that the trans women are men, whatever it happens to be, repressive tolerance is your explanation for that. He goes further in the essay to explain, so we've heard about the idea that violence should be tolerated from the left. Well, even with these social media bans, we see even words and discussion should not be tolerated from the right. And then he says that what you must do is that you must withdraw tolerance before the idea can enter the reactionary right-winger's mind. Therefore, he says explicitly, this requires censorship and pre-censorship, and then explains why that's justified. So for him, the left should be tolerated even when they're violent, no matter what their incursion, and the right must be have all their tolerance withdrawn from them, including to the point of censorship and pre-censorship, so they can't even think their possible right-wing thoughts. That is the repressive tolerance of the world that we live in today.
Well, that's not what I expected it to be. Okay. So, I mean, given Marcuse's who he is, that makes sense that he would choose the left to promote and basically silence the right.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. And he's the synthesist, I think, too, because he criticized both. And the thing I found out about him recently was that he was basically in the CIA, wasn't he? Or
I think, yeah, he was in the OSS. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And he criticized communism, hard communism, and then as well as capitalism. So
he was probably a Hegelist type of guy.
Instead of choosing one side or the other of the two opposing opposites, he offers this is a synthesis just to let the left keep going.
Yeah, but make that dialectic out of whack so it does favor the left. I mean, he clearly He clearly made a choice on that.
That's why I
within
don't.
this essay.
Yeah, but I don't understand about and I feel like they'll always lose. I mean, as long as people there to oppose them, these Hegelists, as you put it, is that he's still creating a new binary that needs a new synthesis by favoring the left and the right.
So what are you saying? Like, where does it go after that? Then what's the?
That's the good question. I mean, that's what we're all here cooking up meals and waiting for, watching unfold. You know,
Mhm.
Lately I've been feeling like less and less inclined to really get riled up about anything and just watch it because I feel like I know it's coming. I mean, on a long term, let's say biblical context, it would be, whatever that final battle is. But in the meantime, it's probably just a bunch of mini little battles, just like that one will be.
Mhm.
There'll be a new battle.
Well, sometimes I wonder if this balance that has gone in favor of, repressing the right and having liberating tolerance of anything that's supposedly on the left.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you do that level of balance, you're encouraging a stronger counter reaction by suppressing it and by allowing all of this stuff that we saw, where it basically created more people that might want to join, like the Proud Boys or whatever. But beyond,
that's not going to get anywhere.
No, I know, but what I'm saying is part of this play for the Hegelists could be to throw it so far out of whack that at some point it boils over. The people who have been restrained may be pushed to their limit, and a lot of this, strategy of tension and pushing sides back and forth, it could be a setup to, and I think James Lindsay's talked about this specifically with drag queens and how that's, they almost want a martyr with that so that they can bring the hammer down again. And he's been calling it like, don't give them drag Floyd, essentially, but like you don't want to have that event that becomes the catalyst for that conflict,
Yeah, they got about like 3 or 5 to 6 years of history to kettle that one, whereas African Americans had 4 hundreds of years,
But the people that are passionate about that narrative and conflict are very passionate.
Yeah, but I mean, let's go back to what you're saying. Like,
what I'm saying is, on that level, I do think that they could be setting up a reaction that does maybe resemble some type of far right authoritarian boogeyman that they've been toying with forever, and they're trying to create the conditions to make it more likely. Now, whether it actually boils over is anyone's guess, but it's not to say that there isn't an element that is being toyed with by allowing this or by playing this out. So I've thought maybe it's a setup to, if they bring that about, then they can say, see, America is the white supremacist fascists, like, oh my God, the whatever. And they had that for what January 6th was and what they painted it as. I think they really wanted it to be worse. I think they were hoping it was going to be worse.
Oh yeah.
So they have to say like, oh, it was deadly. Like, yeah, only for the protesters at the day of anyway.
Yeah, the ones who planted in there to make it seem deadly.
Yeah.
Or to kick off the deadly.
Yeah, Ray Epps, but he's being tortured.
No,
Ray Epps
I'm talking about a homegirl that got shot.
Oh.
If you're open to the theory that she got shot to kick off the.
Oh, I didn't hear that theory. No. Oh,
I'm just throwing it out there. I mean,
well, it's you could be right. Actually,
I could be. We'll never know.
It's all one of those things, but
yeah.
I don't. That's just one idea I've had, that they're trying to initiate that because they're playing dialectics. So
yeah, they'll have somebody on that
other
right.
side,
Yeah.
if the other side is being restrained and not really fighting back with an equal opposite force, because you're in a defensive position when you don't have the media to paint the narrative, that's in a postmodern world, the narrative matters more than reality. I think COVID taught us that
Yeah.
you know, you don't have to have a new variant, or like, it doesn't actually have to be that bad, the virus. They just could say whatever, hype it up, put the emblems on the TV and emergency alerts and just all of that to get you in that state. So when it comes
but
to
first they have to get everybody in a state of feeling good, which is what leading up to 2020 felt good. That whole 2019, didn't it to you? It felt like that to me, and to a lot of people I know. You're coming up on the year 2020. Everyone's like, yeah, we're gonna 2020 vision. There's just a whole bunch of memes surrounding it. It's gonna
I had
be
a good New Year. I had a good New Year into 2020. It was fun.
Yeah, it was great.
One of the
Everybody was
last
feeling awesome. Yeah. And like, that's what you need first if you're gonna drop a bomb. So like that kind of psychological bomb. Bomb. One more time for the censors. But like, I mean, I'm with you on what you're saying. I feel that's afoot. I just feel it's all evil too. And not in opposition to what you're saying or to counter it or anything. I just, that's how I've thought about these things too. And it just feels like at this point they've blown their wad on at least this cycle. And I could be way wrong because things could get way worse. But on this cycle, it seems like they blew their wad. I mean, we'll see if they run Big Meech out for president. It's all the cards are.
Well, I mean, it
back
is
in the shuffling deck because
it is in Chicago in 2024. So
yeah, what better place?
Right.
Yeah, but I don't know how far more the left can go in terms of who is going to be their leaders and their heroes. Maybe it doesn't matter, but I feel like that population is dwindling, whereas there's more, I wouldn't say there's more in opposition to the left, but there's more on the sidelines, like saying, it's not for me, like they thought it was. So that's where I wonder why, or I wonder how they're gonna either create a new dialectic, or they have to kind of synthesize real quick the one they got going on.
I mean, I think they've been trying to stir that pot with the trans stuff. Like you said, I don't think it has as strong of a legs, but at the same time, it is kind of stewing in the background. The whole drag queen stuff, I think, is to throw it in people's faces more, again, to elicit that reaction.
Yeah, I know, but the people they're doing it in front of just are I think they're smarter to they're not as medicated as the left. Let's put it that way, because I think that was pretty easy to do because those youth are highly medicated.
Well, I mean, so it could go either way in this scenario. So the alternative to what I said about this setting up a counter reaction would be to have the left actually go full blown totalitarian, do the Maoist revolution, or whatever version of that you're going to try to do, maybe involving technocracy and AI, if we want to throw that into. But however they throw the hammer down on the population, and also because I mean, a lot of youth and college age kids are extremely indoctrinated into this. I don't know how much of that I'm seeing is just isolated, but it seems pretty prevalent and has gotten worse.
Yeah, man. I got 7-8 trans flags on my neighborhood this year.
No.
Yeah.
Wow.
They're using them as curtains. Curtains.
Wait, on one house or
no?
No, 7 houses. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Probably more. I mean, I just kind of gently notice them when I'm bike riding.
You don't see that. I did notice that about Michigan, that there are more the sign people. They like to have their sign out.
Oh yeah.
And they're flat.
Yeah. Next time you're here, we'll just go for we'll leave our wives for a while, and we'll go on like a 6-hour little journey around town.
That'll be fun.
It will be. It'll just be fun. So many good eat spots, man. Oh my god. Anyway,
Hate has no home here.
Yeah, you don't even need words anymore, maybe.
We
Not since the yellow and gold or the blue and gold. It's perfect. It's perfect for U of M. It just lines up. It's really great.
Yeah. Well, Ann Arbor, as we mentioned, this is where the Weather Underground started. So you're kind of in the belly of this beast right now.
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure. That's Spook Central over there.
Spook Central.
Yeah.
Well, Colorado is as well, but
oh yeah.
In its own way.
Oh yeah.
So, they were talking about BLM or mentioned it through a lot of different what was it, the last thing I played? Maybe it was the Lawyers Guild.
Yeah. That's
so
Marcuse we played.
Yeah, Herbert Marcuse, sorry. But one of the last clips I was brought in this topic, and coincidentally, as you're probably aware, there was a splinter group of the Weather Underground called the May 19th organization, and they also did some bombings, and one of the members was a woman by the name of Susan Rosenberg, who has a pretty strong connection to BLM.
Well, despite its immense political power, and it does have immense power, the group Black Lives Matter isn't really much of a group. It's a relatively small, flimsy organization. In fact, it doesn't really have a legal existence of its own. Officially, the primary Black Lives Matter group is simply a project of another nonprofit called Thousand Currents. Now, why is this interesting? Well, it's interesting because the current vice chair of Thousand Currents is a woman called Susan Rosenberg. And she's a convicted terrorist who spent 16 years in federal prison before she was given a pardon by Bill Clinton on the very last day.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for dinging that bell.
Also a Rhodes Scholar.
Also a last day pardon or exoneration or whatever.
Yeah, him and Cuomo. God, who's Biden gonna tackle? That's the question.
Oh.
Just kidding. He's never getting out of office. I'm just kidding.
Oh.
Bernie Kerik remembers this well. He's the former police commissioner of New York City, but before that, he worked in New Jersey.
And look at that. Look at that. People, look at that gun. That might be considered an assault rifle.
It's funny you mentioned that.
Courthouse in Newark in 1985. He knows the story well, and we're happy to have him on tonight. Mr. Kerik, thank you for coming on. That picture is remarkable. So,
you remember Bernard Kerik from? You may remember Bernard Kerik from psyops such as 9/11. He was the police chief. He was Giuliani's police chief. Yeah, that guy. Wow. Yeah, and he's kind of a spook himself, obviously. That was him in that picture.
I had hair then, Tucker. I had hair.
Wow. And an AR-15. So what?
That looks like an M5.
Right?
Why is it significant that she now, in effect, works for Black Lives Matter?
Well, for me, on a personal note, it's important for your viewers to know who she is, because Black Lives Matter, as I've said, dating back to 2015, it's a revolutionary Marxist group. That's what it is. It's a group that wants to overthrow this government, the country. It's a group that its founders, its 3 founders, were inspired by a woman named Joanne Chesimard, who goes by an African name, Assata Shakur, who lives in exile in Cuba after she assassinated
a New Jersey state trooper. She was involved in a number of bombings and executions of New York City cops, cops in San Francisco, and cops in New Jersey. That's who they are. That's what they're about. And when I tried to explain that to people over the last 2 or 3 years, they didn't get it. Now, in the last few weeks, we learned Susan Rosenberg is one of their fundraising gurus, let's say. Well, Susan Rosenberg, in 1985, when you look at that photo, she was convicted of possessing hundreds of pounds of explosives. She was involved in the Brinks Nyack robbery, where 2 cops were killed and a security guard was killed. She was involved, her and her organization, the May 19th Communist Organization, they were involved in a number of police assassinations, bombings, the U.S. Capitol bombing, the Naval War College bombing, and a number of others in the United States. She was a radical revolutionary, and she was let out of prison. She was commuted on the last day of President Clinton's term in office. After 16 years in prison, she was given 58 years in prison. And now she's out. Who does she work for? Black Lives Matter. I think we're missing something here. I think DOJ should be looking at Black Lives Matter as a terrorist group, as a terrorist organization. And I think I find it astounding that all these U.S. firms, some 200 that you've chronicled on your show, they're just pounding money into a group that's all about the overthrow of this government. And if you can't see it on its face by what they do normally on a daily basis, then you need to start looking at their associates, their inspirers, and the people around them, because this stuff has been going on since 1960, 70, in the early 80s, when these people, these revolutionaries, Marxist revolutionaries, wanted to overthrow this country.
It's just amazing that all the rich ladies in Aspen and Greenwich think BLM is about ending racism, which obviously all of us are for, when in fact it's a revolutionary group. Maybe the U.S. government could take decisive action, and by doing that, make it really clear that this is a terror organization.
You know what, Tucker? Black Lives Matter was truly, working for Black lives. They'd be marching tonight in Chicago, or Baltimore, or Cleveland, and I can give you 20 other.
All right. Well, I'm not, whether BLM explicitly is trying to overthrow the government. He's kind of taking that in the other opposite direction and painting that brush. Yeah. And that's his position. But and that's why I don't like terrorism legislation, because it's just like, oh, well, they should declare them a terrorist organization. But you know where that ends up going to. So, but and it's come back the other way when it comes to January 6th. But this connection with Susan Rosenberg, it still blows my mind to this day that it's that you have to. Unfortunately, this is like the only mainstream news outlet that covers it, and Tucker's like the release valve for all this stuff, so he can be the turd in the punch bowl that alienates people from this message, while also spreading awareness about something that no one else is talking about, but makes it impossible for some people to listen to. And but this was the only place to find it, and it actually got removed from YouTube. Oh. That's why I had to get on BitChute.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was that. He pushed it too far then.
Super incendiary, all those words and all that information, man.
You mean from Bernard Carrick, you're saying?
Just from this whole video to get it removed from YouTube? Jeez.
Yep.
It's that's so sick. Wow. Well, this I was just like, well, sorry about that. It's just like, who needs to hear this information? Because if I say that it's the boomers, well, how many boomers are out there kind of siding, anti-Vietnam, anti-war? It's really easy to be anti-war it's really also easy to look back on that era and say it was only about being anti-war. So then these players here that are got different agendas kind of get lumped under the well, they just opposed the unjust war. I was on their side. So when you hear as a boomer that Bill Clinton pardoned one of them, I mean, don't you think that just drifts into their minds as being a good thing?
Well, I don't think they even know about it. That's the thing.
That's true.
I mean, what was it? Mark Rich also got pardoned by Bill Clinton, I believe, and that was the focus because he was like a friend who was involved in some shady financial stuff.
Right.
And that was the focus instead of Susan Rosenberg. And as far as I can tell, at least from my recollection, I was in 8th grade at the time, but
right.
I didn't see any. I mean, I'm sure it was a blurb, but
yeah.
for the narrative, they didn't bring that in. They didn't
Right.
mention, like, isn't this kind of interesting? No, because clearly there's cover for this for some explicit purpose, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I believe, based on all these connections with the Weather Underground and Bill Ayers and the Obamas and like all these organizations, there's an element within the U.S. government, other Western governments, that is very sympathetic to, at the very least, using communism or these types of tactics to play their dialectics. I mean, they're using it as a chess piece. I don't think, David Rockefeller, when he was, helping China open trade to the world, I don't think he was doing that because he's like, oh yeah, I'm a true believer in communism. He just saw it as a way to monopolize a market and utilize that tool or piece on a chessboard to, play out conflicts and make money along the way. That's the one of the oldest games that's being played.
Yeah.
And the Weather Underground were just one part of that. Whether it was a trial run, Herbert Marcuse's intelligence background influences him. Bill Ayers' parent, father connection. Who knows what they're pushing?
Yeah, I mean, once again, it's like
them.
Rich kids,
MK Ultra. Who knows?
Parents like that, highly influential rich people's kids, just like the music of the time. It seems to be the theme.
Well, coincidentally, a lot of music stars from the 60s were children of military intelligence.
Yeah.
Jim Morrison. All the Laurel Canyon stuff, which I thought about going into, but the Weather Underground, this topic kind of took over because there was just too much to talk about. And I would like to cover the music industry and even maybe, pop culture in general with this in mind.
This whole era would be like,
it's a gold mine. I mean, Charles
Yeah.
Manson, the MK Ultra, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And this is just one thread of it, but I mean, to get Cuomo to pardon this guy, like, they're doing favors, backdoor favors.
Absolutely. And Cuomo might not even, I'm sure he knows.
Well, I guess Chesa is politically connected, so he probably made a phone call and all that. That's just within the establishment. But
plus, Cuomo comes from the same type of father, so he was probably around these circles in his youth as well.
Right.
Knowing these people at some level. Had to.
Yeah, it's I think it goes. What I learned in researching this is it even for what I knew, it went deeper than what I was aware of, especially with the Lawyers Guild and all that stuff. It's just there's been something being played out and in public, but it seems a lot of the time it seems organic, but actually not. I mean, if you're actually, if you're paying attention to all the different tactics that are repeated and slogans and the fist and all that, you're left to wonder a little bit about what the pattern is here and how it keeps playing out and who's steering it.
Yeah.
And that leads me to my last little clip here from Jay Dyer, and he just sums up this whole dialectic that we've been talking about. Oh, now I am failing to play it. Let's try it here. Okay.
He goes on to say, well, if we look at the structure of this supporting and funding of revolutions, we'll notice that socialists always get money from industry, bankers, and monopoly capitalists. That always seems to be the case. And then he says that, again, this is because it collectivizes the wealth. And we can even begin to understand how Woodrow Wilson played into this because, of course, he played a big role as the tool of the banking elite in helping to push forward support for not just World War I, but also for the centralized banking power in the U.S., right? We get the Federal Reserve again in 1913, which is one of the planks of the Communist Manifesto. Now, I don't think that the Federal Reserve and what's happening in America is a Marxist conspiracy per se, because it's higher than that, right? And so what a lot of people like Anthony Sutton and people that were looking into the communist takeover, right? What McCarthy and others, what they were really stumbling upon without knowing it was high level industrialists and capitalists and Wall Street funding for liberalism and socialism, which they mistook to be a sort of grassroots or a foreign power running that operation. It wasn't Moscow primarily. Now, Moscow was a Soviet government. But again, the point that Sutton makes is that there wouldn't have been a Moscow, a Soviet government, or anything like that if you hadn't had treason at the highest, wealthiest levels in the West to support those movements. And so he says industrialists and bankers formed the support, first of all, for Trotsky. And the U.S. Bolshevists in the U.S. were big supporters of Woodrow Wilson because they saw him as an ally. And so you get this important support for Trotsky. Oil money, Wall Street, through oil magnates and oil money, supported the Bolshevik Revolution. And he ends his first chapter by saying that this is really a kind of a dialectic. And I think that's the key point here, is that to understand dialectics, just to understand the philosophy of opposing power and forces, of the good guys versus the bad guys, black versus white, night versus day, right? Now, I don't believe that those things are inherently bad or inherently evil or anything like that. But what happens is that through manipulation, people will take things that are distinct and try to smash them against one another. This is a central component of Marxism socialism. They actually believe that dialectical process is almost this sort of mystical evolutionary thing which brings about revolution. And so that's why Marxism has as its fundamental core component the idea of never-ending revolution and never-ending critique, never-ending clash. It's a philosophy, a worldview of clashing. And that's why it's red, because it's blood and it's warfare. It's never-ending warfare, never-ending destruction and chaos to bring about eternal revolution, which produces the final stages, which produces the utopia, which produces the omega point, right? These different philosophers of dialectics believe this. And so that's why they fund and promote and constantly refer to war, chaos, destabilization, and manipulated chaos. It's necessary, in their view, for the whole process. And that's why, as a Marxist or as a socialist, as a revolutionary, you can't just be an academic. Right? You can't just be in your ivory tower. You have to be out there involved in the streets. You have to be part of the praxis. And so for a Marxist socialist, praxis is just as important as knowing and understanding this esoteric mystery religion philosophy of Marxism.
Never ending.
Never ending. Got to get in the street, though. You can't just be an academic. So,
yeah, you got to be in the game.
Lure them in
the game. That's for sure.
Yeah. I think that's, in a nutshell, what we're seeing play out. I mean, that's the first thing that I go to, and you can analyze any situation from there's a thesis, antithesis, struggling to say these words, and the synthesis.
Yeah.
And if you're aware that people with money, with all the power almost, are aware of that too, and they play it out, you can see it in any situation. I mean, just whatever popular, the culture war is a huge example of dialectics being played.
Oh yeah,
they just took
it's
it
never been so
cultural,
clear.
you know?
Yeah.
You know, and they use those language, the same language over and over regarding people that oppose it. They're the phobias, they're phobic, the white supremacy, the alt-right, conspiracy.
Yeah.
Just those trigger words that they use over and over. And then narrative control is still something that I am in awe of sometimes, because you witness it, you see it playing out, but you realize that most people don't even see it as a narrative. They just see it as reality. And I remember during COVID talking to somebody about what we were witnessing and all the narratives. And I remember them saying, like, what narrative? What are you talking about? I don't know. I don't see a narrative.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh.
It's not even a narrative. It's what is.
They don't know what narrative means then. Or how it's used or any of that. They must not have, unless they did. I don't know. It wasn't there. It wasn't me. It wasn't me. That's all I know.
Yeah. It's it's all around us. I mean, that's, if you control the media, then it doesn't matter on some level. At least I can convince enough people that this is truth, and it becomes this force. And we see this now with COVID, especially, that no matter how much data, how much facts come out about one thing or another, there's some people that just, it's like you're not getting through to it.
Yeah, they don't want to know.
No.
They might know that there's something there, but they don't want to know.
That COVID dialectic, I mean, it's died down, but that was talk about dialectics, anti-mask, anti-that,
deep. Yeah,
science, horse, all the, just a case study in that type of conflict management, I should say.
Yeah, I've got some new thoughts on that, so we'll have to hit them at another time, another show.
Yeah, that's this topic stretches out in many directions. So
yeah, and I think it comes from many directions.
Yes,
absolutely. All right, sir. Should I play us out?
Let's play it out.
It was fun. Get a little deal going and possibly talk to you soon.
Yes, sounds good.
What's up, man? It's your man right here. I like your titties. I'm at Shorty at the mall, her bra holding 2 deep cups of Jello. My sock shello from Leaky Hella. What a bag will do to you when a doobie is moving me to a piece of property. Forget what I just. What's up, man? It's your man right here. I like your titties. I'm at Shorty at the mall, her bra holding 2 deep cups of Jello. My sock shello from Leaky Hella. What a bag will do to you when a doobie is moving me to a piece of property. Forget what I just put the groupie through. Gotta spin until the angel dizzy the diesel. Roll up the PC, please. I'm busy with evil. My hand on the tit, I'm commanding the clip. The span of the shit, nobody knows, but it's expanding the chip. Chicks wanna touch, I might go shoot up the fruits and I dip in my mouth looking like I'm recruited by Lucifer. Ain't like what I roll up as anti-religious, but it's like I copped in Chinatown and was slanderized the bitches. This is for my weather people, them clever people, haters should speak against cause they were never equals. Drug fiends, I was happy to beat you. What you tell the asshole? I'm sorry I ain't treat you. Learn myself cause nobody said let me teach you. This ain't for the Middletown people I still see through. This is for my weather people, them clever people. Haters should speak against cause they were never equals. Dust fiends, I was happy to beat you. What you tell the asshole? I'm sorry I ain't eat you. Learn myself cause nobody said let me teach you. We follow the same road but we know where it leads to. Chrome 380 drive me crazy cause it's fun to clock my tip radar. Calling out more hoes than Thundercats. And that Burberry like a yuppie lumberjack. But you don't see the pattern till I take the coat off Blunder Black. Rolled up, ready for brain acupuncture. Then I took the hoodie off the clit and didn't munch her. Welcome to the strangest of days, those dangerous ways. You find death, I found it in the angel and haze. Johnny Mnemonic with the bubonic and the leather goose. Fuck the North Face, it's what I got underneath this weatherproof. And when it jump out to speak, it'll greet you with a flash of light that leave you in a box. Cause the worms need you. This is for my weather people, them clever people. Haters should speak against cause they were never equals. Drug fiends, I was happy to beat you. What you tell the asshole? I'm sorry I ain't treat you. Learn myself cause nobody said let me teach you. This ain't for the Middletown people I still see through. This is for my weather people, them clever people. Haters should speak against cause they were never equals. Dust fiends, I was happy to beat you. What you tell the asshole? I'm sorry I ain't eat you. Learn myself cause nobody said let me teach you. We follow the same road but we know where it leads to. Come and see hell's house, whatever bleeds yells out. And the first two letters of my clip is we spelled out. The locals hate me cause the locals love me. Every piece of shit MC with a dream from here can't touch me. Fuck me. That's what they hoes yell out, loving the penis. Tight like the rims in the street with the rubber between us. Every time I wipe my eyes, I get cloudy. 10 local rappers wanna write a song about me. In and out of the hash like I'm in and out of the blue mesh. In and out of my mind like I'm in and out of the US. Drip sweat to NY, dip wet then get high. And thank G.O.D. Al-Qaeda wasn't in the sky. This is for my weather people, them clever people. Haters should speak against cause they were never equals. Drug fiends, I was happy to beat you. What you tell the asshole? I'm sorry I ain't treat you. Learn myself cause nobody said let me teach you. This ain't for the Middletown people I still see through. This is for my weather people, the clever people. Haters should speak against cause they were never equals. Dust fiends, I was happy to beat you. What you tell the asshole? I'm sorry I ain't eat you. Learn myself cause nobody said let me teach you. We follow the same road but we know where it leads to.